Morning, everybody. Um, well, as soon as people start joining in, as I record this, it's Friday, June 23rd. We just passed summer solstice, so we are officially, I mean, if you're in the northern hemisphere, we are officially in summer. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you're officially in winter. Um, but always an auspicious time. There's lots of shifts that happen around this time of year. Um, around where I live, the kids are all out of school. Work for a lot of people starts to slow down. People go on a lot of vacations. I live in an area where a lot of people will like to summer, though the weather's been a little weird past few weeks, but a lot of people like to summer up here. It's beautiful, beautiful area, lots of lakes and nature and that sort of thing. So people camp and rent cabins and you know, do stuff on the water and go to the coast and all of those things. So it's a lovely shift this time of year. I mean, I like them all. Don't get me wrong. I'm not prejudging any shift in the time of year, but I guess I'm a little partial. I'm a little partial towards summer solstice. Fond memories as a child of going to camp and camping and doing all of those things as a kid. This morning, I'm going to talk about shame this morning, the curse of shame, and um, taking the spiritual journey towards self-acceptance. I think that's a huge part of the spiritual journey. So, um, I know from statistics that most people join about 7 minutes into the talk. So I'm just going to talk around a little bit and get into the the meat of the thing in a couple of minutes. So, um, but anyway, if you're joining via recording, you are of course seeing this, and I welcome you, and I welcome whoever's going to join live. I do these usually once a week, usually Friday mornings, my time, which is Eastern time in the U.S. And sometimes a ton of people join, and sometimes not, and that's okay, and that's cool. But we welcome everybody, and welcome your questions and your comments. I always learn stuff from the people who tune in, which is kind of a huge, well, I would say is a huge benefit from doing these for me. Um, though I am a spiritual teacher, I think it is probably a mistake for most teachers of any sort to assume that they can't learn things from other people, whether those people are their students or what have you. I learn stuff from my students all the time, and being open to that, I think, makes you a good teacher. One of the things that makes you a good teacher. Um, so anyway, today I'm going to talk about shame. I'm going to talk about the curse of shame. I'll talk about what shame is. Like it seems weird. Kind of a common word, but we might not have applied too much thinking to it. And there is oftentimes confusion between things like shame and guilt, right? Those things are often really tied together. Um, and from a psycho-spiritual perspective, they're very different things. And the difference is critical because it's, you know, it's, um, you know, one thing you can do something about. Well, you can do something about both, but the way that you approach both of them is very different, and where they come from is mostly very different. So let me get into it a little bit. So shame, as it were, shame is a complex of emotions and beliefs. We'll put it that way. It's sometimes people will peg shame to an emotion. I feel shame. You can feel shame, but there's more to it than that. There are beliefs And there's a oh, good day. Thank you for joining. You might be the first to join. Um, Good day to you, and thank you for joining once again. So I'm talking about shame, and I'm going through a rough definition of shame, very rough definition this morning. This is my first cup of coffee. Normally I have two, but this is my I was busy this morning and just time for my first cup of coffee. So, you know, roughly many people confuse shame with an emotion. There is an emotional component to it. But I like to describe shame as a complex of beliefs, mostly that have been given to you that aren't necessarily yours, and emotions that come up from that. And beliefs fuel our thoughts, as do emotions. So there may be a lot of thinking that's involved with that. Um, right. So the idea with shame, and I'm going to contrast it with guilt. Good morning. Nice to see you as always. Um, Thank you for joining again. We're talking about shame this morning, the curse of shame. And it is a curse. And I'll talk, maybe not in the strictest sense of the word, somebody casting a magical spell, but it's something that clings to us and causes damage. So, the basic idea of shame, and the way that I'm going to describe it, is it's the belief, and it might be many beliefs are hidden. You might think to yourself, I don't have that belief. But we have a lot of beliefs that come out of our shadow, and shame tends to be one. Shame's very insidious. It hides right behind things. And shame is a complex of beliefs and feelings that says there is something wrong with me. I am broken, I am wrong, I'm incomplete, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really insidious because it can show up in lots of different ways in our life. We might not go for that job that we've always wanted. Oh, I'm not good enough for that. That might be a thought in the back of our head. Or I'm not good enough for this relationship, or I'm not good enough for this, right? Shame can really, really hold us back. Um, and I'll say up front that I highly recommend the work of Brene Brown. If you've never read her stuff, I think she's a psychologist, but she's very become very popular. She's done a lot of TED Talks and things like that recently. But she specifically studies and writes about shame. So very good information. I like her stuff a whole lot. So shame is the idea that there's something wrong with me, that I'm broken, that I was born a sinner, will die a sinner, et cetera, right? Um, and shame is often used to manipulate people in very insidious ways as well. I'll get back to that, but let me contrast that with guilt for a second. So, guilt, as a contrast to shame, is the idea, the belief, the feeling that I have done something wrong, right? I have caused harm to somebody, or, whatever, and I'm feeling regret about that. I'm feeling guilty about that, right? Guilt is also a quality that we assign to people. You are guilty of, stealing, or you're guilty of, you know, and we have, when we want to tempt people with something, we call it a guilty pleasure, or, that sort of thing. Um, the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is, oh, I've done something wrong. I'm a human being. I can screw up, depending on what I did. I may be able to make that right, or there may be some justice that's allowed for that. There may be some um, compensation or penalty, or whatever. There's something, right? It's not a quality of who I am. That being said, certainly guilt and shame can tie together. Oh, I steal because I'm a bad person. I believe I'm a bad person, and the only way I can get ahead is to steal things, or to harm other people, or whatever. So there can be a shame complex tied into guilt, but I want to just draw those distinctions, because Sometimes there is shame without guilt, meaning you haven't really done anything wrong. You just have this feeling that there's something wrong with you. I think it's safe to say that I'm not going to say everybody, but the vast majority of people have some level of shame complex. I think it's hard to grow up in the Western world without that. And I don't want to um I don't mean this as a criticism of anybody's spiritual beliefs. It's not that. But when you look at the concept from Christianity of original sin, you are born a sinner, you're born tainted, you're born. Now, there is obviously in Christianity a way to overcome that, right? Through baptism or, whatever. I'm not an expert in cleansing of original sin, but I think that's the idea of baptism or whatever. But that's such a culturally strong enforced thing, right? And they're all the, messages about how you are a sinner or imperfect, not just from Christianity, in every and from every area of our lives, from our upbringing, from our education, from our the media that we watch, right? We have body shaming, right? We have images of people who are, supposed to be superlative, fashion magazines or fitness magazines or whatever, and these people are starving themselves to death and dehydrated, and then even then they're airbrushed after the fact. um, I used to be very, very much into physical fitness. I don't know. I probably should be more into physical fitness than I am today. But I used to read a lot of articles about things and whatever, and I was reading about what it took for a fitness model to get ready for a photo shoot, right? So this is somebody who's about to go in front of a camera and have pictures taken, male or female, and they basically starve themselves for days to get cut, and then a couple of days before they start dehydrating themselves because you can't have any sort of puffiness, whatever. So incredibly unhealthy. Here are these people that are being held up as the pinnacle of fitness and health and all of these things, and they're doing some extremely unhealthy, in fact, dangerous things. There are people who have died in bodybuilding competitions, for example, from being dehydrated and having organ failure. Um, who are doing these things for appearance. So, there's a lot to that where shame, one of the reasons why it's insidious is that we compare ourselves to what we see around us, and we're exposed to things that are oh, this is what we should look up to, this is the image of perfection, whether that's what somebody owns. Oh, look at we have going back to old TV shows. We have, I remember lifestyles of the rich and famous. Look at this amazing house this person has, and look at this, and look at this, that. And if you aren't comparing to that, you look at yourself as lower on the totem pole. And I think it was Mark Twain who actually said, comparison is the death of joy, which I love. I've had a lot of clients over the years who are like, oh, I just see all my friends so happy on social media, and I wonder why I can't be that way. And I said, but you're seeing their highlight reels. You're seeing what people are choosing to show on social media, right? And you don't know what's going on in that person's life, or what kind of shame complex they have, or, that sort of thing. So we're always comparing ourselves to others. It's natural. It's how we're built. The problem is that we're presented with very unrealistic people to compare ourselves with. Not people, but identities, personas. These aren't the real people. And if we think, like, we look at these people who may be rich, they may be famous, they may be what we consider beautiful, all of these things, and we look at them and say, does this person have a perfect life, and you look at like the divorce rate in Hollywood and people who are going into rehab and all of these things, these people are not shame free. These people are not always happy with what they have. And to an extent, you know, there's, you know, there's never going to be enough for them to fill that void of shame. There's a story, I don't know if it's true or not, and um, there I'm gonna try and just look up something, see if I can remember who was involved. Um, I think I think it was Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, the novelist who wrote Catch 22. They were at a party at this, really huge mansion somewhere for somebody's mansion, somebody who is, I don't know what they were wealthy for. Um, but they were at a party together. I'm pretty sure it was Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller. It wasn't their party, obviously. Neither one of them was, they were maybe successful in their day, but um, not like that, right? And so they're at this party, and one of them says to the other, look at all of this. Can you imagine no matter how successful your novel is or your books or whatever, you will never have all of this. And the other one, and I can't remember who said what to whom, the other one said, but I have something this person can never have. And they said, what's that? He said, enough. I have enough. What is enough? We live in this world of excess. We live in this world where, we have billionaires flying to space on their own rocket ships. We have, billionaires, the very tragic story of people dying in a submarine going down to visit the Titanic, right? With people now who have um, so much money that almost no experience is outside of their grasp. Not that long ago, if you wanted to go into space, there was only one path for that, and that would be to become an astronaut. You had to be selected. Nowadays, we have people who do that, and yet they're still trying to get more, get more power, get more money, get more control. Why? What will be enough? What's the end goal? I look at um there are some folks out there who became very wealthy, or most people who become very wealthy start out wealthy. There aren't that many self-made people. Is often a myth. Even Elon Musk, love him or hate him or whatever, very polarizing character, like, he didn't start off poor, for sure. His parents owned emerald mines in apartheid South Africa, so you can sort of draw whatever conclusions you want about the wealth there that he started out with. And even Bill Gates, like, yeah, he started a business in his garage, but his parents and he had connections into places like IBM. So this whole, there's this myth of the self-made man. It's pretty rare, actually. It happens, certainly. There are people who come up from poverty and, you know, do a lot. And you'll see some of these guys who very quietly. I worked for a man who is not directly, not like I reported to this guy. Um but I worked for a company that was run by a family that was extremely wealthy, and yet you did not see them in the news. And I know, just because I worked for the company, that there were all of these charities, lots of public art put up around Boston, where I live, all kinds of stuff. Like, the impact on the art world by this individual is almost incomprehensible, and yet you probably wouldn't know his name if I spoke it because he didn't care. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about the limelight. And nor was he, particularly self-made. I mean, he took something and built something huge and international and whatever, but it wasn't about getting more fame for him. He was doing good. So there are people out there. I don't want to just, it's very tempting to bash those that we perceive with more than ourselves. But it's not to say that these folks who we hold up as pinnacles of uh whatever, that they don't have a shame complex that's operating behind the scenes. Because look at a lot of these people, and from the perspective of when will it be enough? We have guys worth 200, 300 billion dollars now. We may in our lifetime see the world's first trillionaire. And at what point can you not basically have anything you want, have any experience you want, go anywhere you want? You can go to space, you can go under the ocean. You can with enough money now travel to the limits of what humanity is capable of, and yet you want more. We have people with hundreds of billions of dollars who aren't paying taxes, for example. Their companies aren't paying taxes anyway. um and I won't get into political argument about taxation or whatever, but it's just an interesting thing to look at. Sometimes shame drives us, and that happens in this case where we see these people trying to fill some gaping hole that can never be filled. The contrast to that is, you know people who are often driven to things like addiction, right, are also driven by shame complex. um I think it's very hard for addiction to happen without there being underlying trauma. Right. And I know, like, um, done a lot of training in shamanism. Of course, but I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist or a licensed mental health practitioner. But I have trained alongside of people who were, I uh, one of my somebody in one of my cohorts i- has run and runs a, you know, um, basically a counseling center for addiction, and is a therapist and all these things, and having conversations with him and others about it. And he said, yeah, we can look at the addiction as the thing is, but if you don't treat the underlying trauma, the shame there, the feeling that I've been broken by something, or that I am broken, if we don't treat that, then treating the addiction is like putting a band-aid on, right? So, really interesting, really interesting viewpoint. I don't know that it's shared by the widest of the community, but I think people are coming around. So shame comes from a lot of places. It comes, like, there's a lot of shame in our childhood, and I have a story. I do have a little bit of a story about this, a personal story. It's growing up. Uh, Growing up, there were things that my parents did that I said I would, declared to myself I would never do if I ever had children. Um, and I'm pretty good about sticking to that. I'm pretty good about, providing a loving environment for my children, being supportive, all of those things. One day, my daughter was 3 or 4, in that age group, and she was just acting up. It's one of those things where whatever she was doing, she wouldn't stop, and I was getting frustrated with her. And I tried my best not to yell and all of those things. And she'd been on timeout and come off timeout and then started to misbehave again. And if you're a parent depending on how old your children are, but if you're a parent whose children have crossed through like 3, 4 years old, it was really funny. I was talking to somebody. Um, Oh, my brother. It was at my grandmother's memorial service a couple weeks ago, and my cousin was there with his baby, or his babies too. And he's like, "Oh, he was so difficult this morning." And we were both like, "Wait till he turns 3. He'll be fun, but it's gonna be." They're very mobile, and they have very, depending on their personality. My daughters have very independent personalities. We'll put it that way. So anyway, she was acting up. I was getting frustrated as a parent, and I said something to her that I promised myself earlier in my life that I would never, ever say to my children. It came out of my mouth anyway. Like, where was that coming from? Well, it was coming from my upbringing. It was something deep back here in my psychology. And what I said to her was, "What is wrong with you? What a terrible thing to say to somebody. What is wrong with you?" That presupposes that there's something wrong with this person, not that they're doing something wrong, that they themselves are broken, that there's you know, something going on. And my daughter at 4 years old looked me square in the eyes. I love this to this day, and said, "There is nothing wrong with me." And it rocked me back on my heels a little bit. And I knew in that moment, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I said something to her that I promised would never come out of my mouth with my children." And so I looked at her and I said, "You're absolutely right. There is nothing wrong with you. I should not have said that. And if I ever say that to you again, I want you to call me on it just like you did today." I said, "However, I'm not happy with your current behavior and we need to change that." And so we worked through it. But I was very proud of her. I was very proud of her at that age to stand up to me and say, "Now, when I was a child, you did not stand up to your parents. Not in my family for sure. Maybe in other families, but it was not a common thing." Um, and and it would potentially incur some wrath in a not so positive way. But you did not, you were taught you don't stand up to people. And I remember when my girls were young in elementary school, um, I got called into the principal's office a couple times. And one time I went in and she said, "Well, something happened. Somebody called your daughter stupid, and she is very verbal, and she talks sometimes like it's difficult to understand that this is a child because she talks like an adult." And she looked at this kid and said, "I'm not stupid. You're slow because yesterday we took a test and we were all done and it took you 20 extra minutes to take that test and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Okay." I said, "First of all, I get it. Like, she can't be talking to other kids that way. But second of all, she was defending herself. Like, that kid shouldn't call her stupid. She's not stupid, but she should be more respectful." And so we had some conversation there was lots of conversations about that. One of which was about her speaking up to adults. And I explained to the teacher, I said, "I have worked very hard to have my children call out things that they think are wrong that are going on with them and have somebody listen to them. And that includes when it's an adult who's doing something that they shouldn't be doing." I said, "And I'm not, that's a safety mechanism that I have with my children, and I'm not going to have them unlearn that. I'm not going to teach them. Now, they do need to learn to communicate respectfully when something's going on, and I will work with them on that. But I am not going to tell them don't call people on their stuff. Don't tell people when somebody is doing something that they think they shouldn't be doing, or wrong, or whatever. So, um interesting, right? Interesting. So, why do I call um why do I call the shame complex a curse? Why did I choose to use that term? And most people, I think, if you think of a curse, will think like literally like a magic spell that somebody places on somebody. Some sort of baneful, what we call baneful magic. Um, there is a little bit of magic to it. Um, yeah, yes, absolutely. Sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. You're right. I mean, part of it is we're taught, don't look at the bad stuff. Don't deny the bad stuff. Part of that's a survival mechanism as well, right? I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. But maybe something needs to be changed. There's a difference between just complaining about stuff to complain about stuff. Oh, the weather's bad, and this and that. But um, and talking about this is wrong and something needs to change about it. What's going on? What's going on here? Something needs to change. Addressing um, issues. I, I've tried to teach the difference to my children. I don't know how successful I've been at that, but like, okay, if you're just constantly complaining, people will shut you off. But if you're talking about something that needs to change and you use your words well, people will listen to you. Somebody will listen to you, and just keep going to somebody until somebody listens to you. But I do my best to always be one who will listen to my children. My daughters are 16 now, and they're going through all the stuff 16-year-olds go through, the drama at school. They've both had boyfriends, they've both had breakups, they both have jobs. Only one of them has her driver's license right now, but um, there's a lot going on with them, and so I try to be that person that, oh, so they'll tell me all the, all I get a lot of the drum. It's kind of funny sometimes. Um, yeah, I agree, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Um, uh, especially when something's going on that needs to change. So, anyway, back to why I call shame a curse. So, there's a type of there's a type of cursing, I guess, that I would refer to as a thought form. And what I mean by a thought form is a thought that I have that I can, on purpose or by accident, implant in somebody else's head. Now, there are lots of ways that this happens. I'm sorry, I'm getting a low battery warning. I'm going to plug my laptop in. I didn't realize it was unplugged. Um, there are a lot of ways thought forms happen. We're exposed to media, for example. Pay attention when so a thing that's been happening a lot recently, but this is a technique that goes back over and over again, is when you are given by the media or political figures or whoever these really short, easy to remember phrases, right? So, like mottos, slogans. I remember when I was a kid, the army, be all you can be, all of these things, like these little easy to remember. These are cognitive shortcuts. Um, and they're meant to impart a thought form used heavily in advertising, but very recently used quite a lot in politics. But have been used for a really, really long time. If you go back to propaganda efforts and things like that, loose lips sink ships. That was a poster from World War II to teach people not to talk casually about things that the military was doing, because you never knew who was listening to what you were saying, right? Loose lips sink ships. Don't have casual conversations about where you're going, and that sort of thing. So little phrases that were meant to be imparted and easy to memorize, but also cognitive shortcuts. Cognitively, people are very lazy, and I mean people, like all people. And I don't mean that as a criticism of people or a way to shame people. It's actually a survival mechanism. If we had to relearn what a saber-toothed tiger looked like every time we encountered one, the human species would not still exist, right? See a saber-toothed tiger, kill a wildebeest one time down at the watering hole, and we remember that for the rest of our lives and pass that on to our children, and we survive, we pass our genes on, the human race survives, right? Cognitive shortcuts. Um, and people have gotten really good psychologically at understanding that, and you'll see these little slogans, these little things that are repeated in the news by especially by political figures. So use caution when you hear and see that. Um, there's something specific that they're doing. So there are different ways to implant thought forms, and shame is a thought form. It's a belief, it's a complex, and it can be imparted by other people, even unintentionally, right? So my parents had a lot of shame. They did what their parents did that passed this like an idea virus. That's the literal meaning of a meme, meme. Like we think about it as these little funny images with text that people share online, but the original meaning of a meme is like an idea virus, is like something that gets passed along, a thought complex that gets passed along, a thought form that gets passed along. And it's a type of cursing. Shame is a type of cursing because it causes harm. So it is baneful and it stays present. And I say that it's insidious because in the strict sense of the word, that it is hidden, that it's hiding, that it's behind, you know, sometimes behind the scenes working things, working us, causing us to behave in certain ways, and can be very, very difficult to tease out. And so one of the important ways to kind of combat the effect of shame and shame itself is through really radical self-acceptance. Really, accepting whatever's coming up. Even the shameful thoughts seems weird, right? Shouldn't I fight those? Shouldn't I resist those thoughts that come up? And the answer to that is a resounding no. What we resist persists, right? That's something that I think Jung said. Um, Resistance holds things in place, right? And the shame complex has become a part of us so much so that we're fighting a part of ourselves. But instead, when shameful thoughts arise, welcome them instead of fighting them. Welcome them with curiosity, examine them, explore them. Where's this coming from? I'm feeling a great deal of shame right now. I'm feeling worthless, helpless, broken. I'm feeling all of these things. Where does that come from? The feelings are hard. Those feelings suck. They really do. But the way to take energy away from a feeling is to allow feelings will arise and fall like a wave, right? They'll rise up and they'll fall. And so by welcoming with curiosity, oh, that's interesting. I'm feeling this right now. Just allow it, just accept it, just be with it, sit with it and see where it goes. And it will drop away. And over time, the wave dies down. becomes less, it becomes less frequent, right? The frequency becomes less, the amplitude becomes less. Um, and maybe you get to the bottom of some of your shame complex. A lot of the shame complex comes out of the shadow, right? The shadow, and I've done whole, probably more than one episode about the shadow. Pardon me, I'm a little stuffy today. I'm definitely allergy season where I am. Uh, the shadow is the exiled part of ourselves that's we is exiled because it's either too painful to look at, or we've been told it's socially unacceptable to have this part of ourselves. And it has many, many parts. It is literally a complex because it has lots of different parts that are hidden that are working together. The shadow comes out when we're triggered, right? Where did that come from? Where did this emotion come from? Where did this overwhelm come from? But a lot of shame lives in the shadow. And so once we start accepting that part, it can come out into the light a little bit. And to Caitlin's point, right? Sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. We heal the shadow parts of ourselves by examining them, by bringing them into the light. One small example of shadow material, if um, you know, my my dad grew up in an era where it was not okay to be left-handed, right? Which is ridiculous. It's just how people were born. You're born left-handed or right-handed. You can see preferences with babies. I have twin daughters. One is right-handed, one is left-handed. As a baby, she would pick things up with her left hand and use them. She would eat with her left hand. So it's not a preference, it's not a choice. And so he literally in school had to sit on his left hand and write with his right hand. So his handwriting is terrible. And there are a lot of things that he has to switch off to do, like I forget certain sports he played, like golf. He golfed, I think, left-handed, batted right hand. Like it would really kind of mess him up. But even parts of his being left-handed had to be relegated to the shadow. Like, he wasn't able to. Maybe he could have picked up a pen and written with his left hand, which would have been his natural impulse. But it was sort of like beaten out of him, not beaten literally, maybe, but definitely forced out of him. You write right-handed, so his handwriting's terrible. If you had to write with your non-dominant hand right now, unless you're ambidextrous, your handwriting would probably be pretty bad too. Um, so parts of himself, and those aren't, big, huge parts of himself, but parts of himself got relegated to the shadow because it wasn't acceptable by society, by the teachers, by the education system he lived in to be left-handed. Nowadays, we'd think that was really weird, but this was the 40s and 50s in the US. It's hard for me to believe. It's hard for me, my parents tell me some of the stories about when they were children, and it's hard for me to understand um, like the rules and things that they had. And it's hard for my children to understand some of the rules and things that I had. Um, Culture changes, but when my mother was a child, grew up in Maine, right? So in the wintertime, when you're going to school, can be very, very cold. All girls were required to wear dresses to school every day, no matter what, no matter how cold it was. You did not wear pants. You did not wear snow pants. Were not allowed to wear trousers if you were a girl. Oh, did it? Yeah. Yeah. So they're probably either in a similar generation or uh, also it happened a lot in religious schools. I hear my father went to public school, but I heard a lot of that happening like in Catholic schools. I live in an area with um, lot of Catholic schools, Catholic elementary schools and stuff. So there was a lot of that. Um, Yeah, lots of stories there about upbringing. So this is a lot of where our shame complex comes from, and it is a complex because there's lots of different parts to it, right? Um, Sometimes shame will drive us to, again, to succeed in some field, to try to fill that void. And that might seem like a really amazing thing, like a really good thing to have a lot of success in life, however you want to measure that. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being successful financially or education wise or in your career or as a parent or as an artist or whatever field and whatever measure of success. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem happens when it's never enough for us. When we can't there's no amount of success that will make us feel okay. And that's a tough place to be in. And that's, in full, that's a thing that I've struggled with in my life. I made up for my shame complex by um, you know, trying to achieve stuff. And then when I would achieve it, I was on to the next thing, right? So I wound up getting a couple of master's degrees, starting a couple of businesses, um, getting, training in martial arts my whole life, getting a teaching certificate, teaching license in jujitsu, getting a third degree black belt, doing, just stuff. It doesn't make me a better person. It doesn't make me a happier person. It doesn't make me whatever. Um, you know, it's helped with my career, it's helped with me learning how to teach, it's helped, that sort of thing, but it doesn't none of that undoes the complex that was driving it, right? I'm sorry, I've gotta go. I've got an emergency call coming in, and sorry for cutting this off abruptly.